Okay, these are notes 17.2, and I don't know if we'll get to 17.3, but I'll go as far as I can here. So this is our role in Vietnam began to escalate during this time period. So a lot of times, this is talking about from about 1963, 4 to about 1970 time period wise. Um, Now, if we look at some of the things that basically happened at this time. We have a lot of our special forces originally started in Vietnam, but as it became more and more involvement, um, obviously there was going to be more sacrifice overall. Now, one of the things that happens with Viet Cong um, is basically um, uh, there was attack at Pelkinu. I'm probably saying that wrong. And as a response to that, President Johnson orders Operation Rolling Thunder. Now, Operation Rolling Thunder was basically carpet bombing, um, also like extreme sustained bombing. These are not using massive warheads. These are using a lot of the same type of bombing techniques that was used in World War II. Um, like it typically was a lot of um, bombing of military targets, but basically every night they began to um, destroy a lot of different areas. Now, during the time between 1965 and 1973, we have 6 million tons of bombs that are dropped on the North Vietnamese. Um, Now, one of the things about this is our commitment to put less men on the ground. The goal here is possibly to have less of an impact on, um, you know, human lives. It's just money, really. That's what bombs are. One of the things that this does, though, even though there was quite a bit of bombing, it really didn't make peace with the North Vietnamese. It did not force them to surrender, which that was the goal in this. That LBJ said that if we could get them, you know, inflict enough destruction, basically, we'll force them to surrender. That doesn't happen. So, a couple things that we began to use during this time period of 1965 to 1970, all the way up to 73. One of the things was napalm. Napalm is like a jellied gasoline. Um, it's placed in containers. When they drop it from planes, it explodes upon impact. Um, and sometimes it can be exploded itself, like from a remote, also remote, like from the plane itself. One of the things that it causes is it burns out a lot of the jungle areas. It's very hard to extinguish because napalm sticks to trees, it sticks to grass, and it just keeps burning. Um, there's kind of like if you could kind of come up with something like napalm, just taking gasoline and styrofoam. The gasoline kind of jellifies the styrofoam, but if you used it for a fire starter or something like that, it would actually light and burn for a very long time. Now, if you got that on your skin, you're going to burn. Another thing that they really wanted to do was to try to stop some of the jungle. So, if we could kill some of the jungle off, it's possible that all this cover that was used, we could, have a better advantage. And that's where Agent Orange comes in. Agent Orange was a really big mistake for the U.S. military. Science would have probably told them this, and maybe they knew that. Who knows? But the herbicide killed plant life, but it also disrupted human life. Agent Orange ends up being a problem not only for skin diseases later on, but also it causes a genetic issue that could go down to 4 generations. The direct impact of the herbicide on the land itself caused a lot of birth defects in the following generations. A lot of pictures of people and things that are a result of Agent Orange. Not only that, the lungs, the mental capabilities of many people that were exposed to Agent Orange, it didn't have an effect right away, but over time it did. A lot of the things that we completed were defensive. We took up a lot of defensive positions. We weren't very offensive in this war. Most of the time, we were defending different areas or ourselves. We never really went on the offensive. Many times, Vietnam veterans give reports of, not being able to engage until, the enemy was right on top of them or things like that. That was really frustrating to them. Now, the conspiracy on that, who knows? There was a lot of search and destroy missions, finding particular people, but the biggest thing that had an impact on us was guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong would ambush us. They'd set off explosives. They'd set booby traps. They'd have minefields with poppin' daisies, things like that. Really destructive to American military, especially in the area of wounding someone, not to where they die, but to where they lose their legs or things like that. The strategy of the Vietnamese and the Viet Cong was to wear down the Americans. You know what? They can only lose so many people, and they're going to leave. This isn't their country. This isn't their land. Now let's take a look at what napalm really looks like. This is a canister being dropped from a plane. It's not a great video as far as quality, but you can see some of the explosion on impact, how it explodes more on impact as bombs are dropped. See the ball of fire on a lot of this. Um, I There's a lot of videos out there, a lot of them from the Vietnam era. Um, it's really disturbing, especially some of the ones of the children that were impacted by this. We're talking about massive burns. We're talking about burns that were fatal or very immobilizing. I think this video might be looped, but anyway. Irregardless, that gives you an example of what napalm looked like coming from the plane. Now, let's look at Agent Orange. Um, One thing about Agent Orange is it's an herbicide. It basically it's a lot of the cause of skin cancer, including melanoma, also birth defects. For a long time, the military completely ignored the fact that it was um, not only an issue, but that it really had any life impact on them. One of the things with Agent Orange, it eventually becomes something that they agreed to do compensation in 1991, and then again in the 2000s, I think they expanded that compensation. Yeah, that was August 2010, where they expand that to other types of diseases that they realized it could cause. The link could be type 2 diabetes. There's quite a few. One you might be also that shows a genetic connection is spinal bifida, which has actually been on the rise overall. And like I said, these could be fourth generation Agent Orange impact. Now, does the herbicide kill the jungle? Definitely. But what impact did it have overall on people, especially looking at things like cancer and other diseases that are on the rise? Many of these people were received compensation. Some weren't able to prove it, and some still have, or still debating whether they received compensation for that. It shows you the long impact of financial responsibility on America as far as a war like this. All right, so how do we get this many troops? This many people die in Vietnam. How do we put this many troops in this little tiny country in Southeast Asia? Well, in 1965, we only had 184,000 troops in Vietnam, and we only had about 636 deaths. Now, obviously, for those families and those people that died, 636 is a lot. But look at 3 years later. 3 years later, we increased our troops, about 300,000 troops increase into Vietnam, but we have 30,000 deaths. One of the things that causes an issue here was the South Vietnamese. These people, it's not like it's a really known enemy. The Viet Cong was in South Vietnam and they were working kind of like undercover. I'll show you a video clip showing tunnels and things like that. But by the later 1960s, most people realized that this war was really a stalemate. If you look at this graph down here, you can tell that we're just going up in spending as far as billions of dollars of the escalation. Now, you can see the difference in troops, also the increase in fatality of American casualties. And this has an overall impact at home also. So let's look at a few of their tactics. So just seeing a little bit of there of the tunnel system and how that had an impact. You can see how the whole Chai Min Trail comes down here through Laos and Cambodia, and how they were able to use those advances into South Vietnam without ever actually invading the country until they were at their point of uh, entry, where they were going to complete the battle. Now, the Viet Cong avoids any significant engagement. They do not engage with us. We will attempt to engage them, but they don't do traditional warfare. Most of our battles were indecisive battles. They were fought in jungles and mountains. In the beginning, many Americans responded to the call for men. They were volunteers. They said, you know what, this is the domino theory. This is the world at war. It's part of the Cold War. My country calls. I'll respond. By 1965, the war had become so unpopular, most of the Americans in Vietnam had been drafted. You know, drafting is not really a volunteer situation, so that does make a difference. Now, overall, the South Vietnamese were indifferent to their own nation. They didn't seem to be as worried about communism or the takeover as we were, which caused a lot of American soldiers to feel like that we were fighting an unwinnable battle. Many thought the war was going to be a quick engagement. I mean, come on. It's a little tiny country in the middle of nowhere. And basically, you know, we're the biggest country on the planet as far as power and munitions. Only people that really we can't beat is Russia because they have nuclear power. After a few years, we began to question the war. By 1965, a lot of people began to question why we were there. Johnson at home had to raise taxes to pay for the war. He also had to cut back on the Great Society, things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that a lot of people wanted to see in place. Um, Causes a lot of issues. Now, there's two people. The Hawks were the ones that supported the war. They were against communism. They believed it was a part of the domino theory. The other problem with the Hawks is they felt like that we were already there. We kind of had to finish it. The Doves were against the war, said it was a localized civil war. It was not a Cold War battle. So it really didn't apply here. And that's 17.2.